the city of brotherly love. So phileo love. Thirdly, there is eros, which is romantic love. And chances are, if you're going by the culture and the world's definition of love, this third kind, eros, romantic love, is the most commonly associated type of love in the mind of the culture. And so those are the first three. But the fourth and greatest final type of love is agape love. Agape is self-sacrificial love. It's God's love. It's, God so loved the world, he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God demonstrates his own love in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It's the kind of love that gives of itself with nothing in return. So those are the four kinds of love. And I want to tell you a story really quick about agape love. So one of the greatest love stories of all time. Has anybody seen the movie Casablanca? So that's widely renowned as maybe being the greatest movie of all time, if not the greatest love story of all time. So you have it's starring Humphrey Bogart here on your right, and it has three main characters, and it focuses on the love triangle between them. There is Ilsa, Rick, and Victor Laszlo. And both of the men are in love with Ilsa. The problem is she happens to be married to Victor. So what happens? Well, the story takes place in the city of Morocco, the city of Casablanca, which is in Morocco. And everyone who's there, they're sort of in limbo. They're all waiting. By the way, it's during the Second World War. They're all waiting to get access to safe passage to the Americas, to the safer side of the world. So everybody's waiting around, including Ilsa and her husband, Victor. And the problem is the person who has the papers they need is Rick. So Rick has the papers they need to leave. What's he going to do? Well, when Rick discovers that Ilsa is still in love with him, despite being married to Victor, all of a sudden, his life regains hope. Now he can get rid of Victor and keep Ilsa for himself. So what does he end up doing? Well, in a twist of fate, his heart suddenly, when it regains that hope, all of a sudden his purposes shift. And rather than doing the selfish thing, he actually lies to Victor and says, oh, she was just pretending to be in love with me so that she could get the papers. And so he sends both of them off so that they can do their thing together in their effort to fight the war. And he does it so that he can be by himself, so that he can also, once again, take up arms in the war. So, one of the greatest love stories of all time. In this story, agape love means letting go. Agape love means gaining by losing. It means giving up what you might desire for a greater cause. So it's a story of war, and it's a story of love and duty. And it's amazing to see what he does with that. So agape love means letting go. So those are verses 1 through 3. If we look at verse 4, love is patient. So you'll see behind me in a second, there was a study done that was published in the U.S. National Library of Medicine in 2002, which is almost 20 years ago. 75% of Americans by the age of 20 had engaged in premarital sex. In other words, only 25% of Americans, by the time they reached age 20, had either abstained or gotten married, and about 12% ended up getting married. We live in a culture today that is increasingly slow to commit and quick to seek instant gratification. Dave Ramsey commonly says that we live in a slow cooker society. We used to live in a slow cooker society. Today we live in a microwave society. We have people jumping into mortgages and getting houses at age 25 when our parents worked their entire lives to get them. It's an increasingly instant gratification culture. But by contrast, love is patient. And not only is love patient, love is kind. So I got this from Dr. Robbie Waddell. That's a tongue twister there. He's the pastor of Oasis Church. And he says this. He says that in church, typically, we're all very kind of nice to each other. You probably noticed that. You probably got your hand shook by someone when you walked in. I don't know if that's proper grammar, shook, but anyway. We smile at each other, we greet each other. And we're all very nice. It's great. But the problem with nice is that nice never really challenges the status quo. See, the problem with nice is that it never asks those hard questions. You know, how are you really doing? Is this direction really where we're supposed to go? Is that choice? Is that lifestyle? Is that really of God? So the problem with nice is that, yeah, it shakes your hand, it smiles at you, it pretends everything's okay, but nice never, ever interrupts the status quo. It never asks the hard questions. And nice is not a fruit of the Spirit. Kindness is a fruit of the Spirit. And kindness never allows a brother or sister it never stands by idly while they are about to fall. It always intervenes. It always does something. It can't just stay silent. So love is patient and kind. Love does not envy. Augustine said, the reason why love does not envy is because it is not puffed up. For where puffing up precedes, envy follows. Because, watch this, pride is the mother of envy. Let me say that again. Pride is the mother of envy. So love does not envy, and neither does it boast. So, who is the most boastful person you know? Hopefully, it's not me, but if it is, I'm sorry. So historians say that maybe the most boastful person of all time was none other than the famous French dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. This was a man so proud. Well, actually, I just thought of this. He actually had like a syndrome named after him. Right. But he was so proud that he actually said in his own words that he was a, quote, man unlike other men, above the laws of morality. He actually said that about himself. But maybe one of the most humble men of all time, by contrast, was the great missionary William Carey. So before his successful career as a missionary, he worked as a cobbler. He was somebody who repaired shoes. But then afterwards, when he was a little more successful, he was at a party, and there was this snobby man who was kind of berating him for starting off with such humble beginnings. You know, he called him a shoemaker. Like, what good is a shoemaker? But William Carey did this. He corrected him graciously, and he responded by saying, "No, your lordship." He called him lordship. By the way, have you ever met somebody who, like, they're so nice and that you actually may think that they're being sarcastic or something like that? So this is the kind of person I think he was. He says, "No, your lordship, not a shoemaker, only a cobbler." That's what humility looks like. Love does not envy or boast. Love is not arrogant or rude. So here's one thing that I regret. I regret the times when I have either written something online or said something that made fun of someone who wasn't inside my little bubble. Someone who was outside of my, belief system, or outside of my, perspective, my way of life. And unfortunately, I've heard that so often from Christians. I've even heard it from the pulpit. But when we do that, we're not bringing anyone closer to Christ. We're actually ostracizing them and pushing them further away. We can't do that and call ourselves Christians. Love is not arrogant or rude. When we do that, we're no better than all the mudslinging we see, in the news, on Twitter. Love is not irritable or resentful. Literally, that word resentful means it keeps no record of wrongs. So, I heard a story one time about a real married couple, and this couple was on the brink of divorce. They were in counseling. It wasn't looking good. So they were telling their story, and the story went like this. It all started one day, years and years and years ago. The man came home, and he had to use the restroom, so he did. I don't know why all my analogies today are about the restroom. So he goes home, he goes in the restroom, and he goes to reach for the toilet paper, but instead he finds one of these. Has anybody seen one of these before? Anybody married in the room? So he finds one of these, and reasonably he was pretty distressed, and he had to do that awkward number where you waddle over to get it. And so The next time he sees his wife, he's like, hey, can you replace it next time? And she says, yeah, of course. So the second time it happens, he's a little bit more upset. He's like, hey, I thought I asked you to, just replace the toilet paper. And she says, oh yeah, I'm sorry. So by the third and the fourth time, he finally gives up asking. And rather than asking, he begins collecting. So years and years and years and years go by. And finally, one day they're having some argument, and he storms off. He goes into the closet. He pulls out this bag full of these little toilet paper things, and he dumps it angrily on the floor. And she's like, what is this? And he says, this is proof. If you loved me, you would have replaced the toilet paper. She just looks at him and says, you need help. So don't be like this guy. Love keeps no record of wrongs. So love does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth.